Good morning. This is the League of Women Voters Summit-Wasatch Unit meeting. And Wendy Fisher is our guest speaker today. I think we have about 12, 13, 14 on here right now. So Wendy, I'd like you to introduce yourself. Wendy is a longtime friend of mine from, I don't know when, the 80s, I think.
Long time.
Long time. So Wendy, introduce yourself and then just jump into it. If you haven't finished your presentation by 11:30, I'll interrupt and put us into question and answers. Okay.
Great. So with that, I'm going to give a brief introduction of myself.
Yeah.
I'm Wendy Fisher. I'm the executive director of Utah Open Lands. I've actually been with the organization since its inception. That's 33 years. The organization actually started in Summit County. And back in the day, we were the first local land trust in the state of Utah. And our goal really was to look at how we could protect the mountain resort character of the Park City community, but also to protect so much of the landscapes on the Wasatch Back. And what I always like to tell people is we were there at the inaugural open space bond, but prior to any open space bonds happening, including the state source of funding that we now have, Utah Open Lands had protected 21,000 acres on the Wasatch Back through tax incentives that were part of the IRS tax incentives. Fortunately, as much as I know you all want to hear about the IRS tax incentives, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. So my family lived in the Park City area. Prior to that, I grew up, a lot of my time spent in Utah County. And so this conversation that we're having about agricultural land is near and dear to my heart, because the orchards that I used to ride through when I was a young kid in Utah County are now pretty much gone. And I think there's a lot of question about, how do we sustain some of these agricultural landscapes that provide so many other resources for us as communities, and what does it all mean? So with that, I'm going to jump right into my presentation. And for sure, if you can't see the presentation, if it doesn't come up, please definitely let me know. I will get it started.
It's up.
Great. So sometimes when I go to full screen, you can't see it, but I'm assuming you're all good.
I think so.
I know that Jill had offered to field some questions in the chat as we go along. Certainly I'll answer those at 11:30 as well, but if you have a burning question, don't hesitate to answer. And I'm going to give you 2 seconds as I introduce this for you to enter in the chat. How old do you think the average age of the U.S. farmer is? Don't shout it out, but you can enter it in the chat. I don't have a door prize, but how old do you think the average farmer in the U.S. is? And I think going along with that, what I want to discuss a little bit today is why that might actually matter to many of us. Not just because, let's face it, we all have in common the fact that we eat. And so food is an important element, but also when you think about the landscapes that we associate with open space. And then what are some of the things that we can do about it? And that's really what I want to talk about in terms of family farms and food access, and how we see it relating to conservation easements. Well, for those of you who entered 57.5 years old, you were correct. The average age of a farmer in the US is 57.5 years old. And I think the interesting element to that is that a third of the landscapes, or a third of the farmers rather, are 65 years or older. And actually, most of our farmers and ranchers own about 80% of the private land that is out there. So we're in a space, if you think about it as a community, as a society, as a nation, where we're going to start to see some real generational shifts. They're going to have a tremendous impact on our communities as these lands shift from these farmers and ranchers, and whether or not they have the next generation coming up who want to do the hard work of moving hand lines and growing crops. So that's something that we all should be thinking about. I think when people think about Utah open lands, oftentimes they associate us with these grand, large-scale landscapes that we've protected. You're looking at the Armstrong Snow Ranch pastures and the Armstrong Heritage Barn conservation easements. But what you're looking at in that beautifully restored barn, which you can see from the fifth hole of the Park City Golf Course, is actually an old dairy barn. And I love the fact that Mel and Herb Armstrong, who were the two young boys that joined their grandfather on the Snow Summit Ranch out here, we have this article from the Salt Lake Tribune when Mel, I think, was about 12 years old, and he had gone down to the fairgrounds here in Salt Lake, and they had won with their prize cow. Irene Chuckanut was her name. So, it's one of those things that I look at and I think again, that shift, and certainly this viewscape, this is definitely part of what we associate with our quality of life and what resonates for us in our various different communities are these open landscapes. But when you think about where this landscape started, it was a dairy. In fact, that barn was constructed in 1926 by a mine superintendent, because as many of you know, they were creating victory gardens and all sorts of ways to keep some of the miners fed in the area. So there's always been this connection in our communities between our farmers and the resources of the land and what we associate really with our sense of place and home. When Utah Open Lands was starting new and trying to convince folks that protecting open spaces was a critical thing, that we needed to do conservation. One of the things that we were very aware of was that without a source of funding, it would be tough to do substantial land conservation work. And so in the mid-90s, actually the governor of the state became interested in what we were talking about. And he created a critical lands task force. And we started looking at all sorts of elements with respect to agricultural lands and the protection of open space and even recreational opportunities in the state of Utah and what that would mean. And I served on that task force. And there were several things that were really interesting that came out of that task force that then became the genesis and created the Leroy McAllister Critical Lands Fund, or the Leroy McAllister Working Lands Fund, which right now in appropriations does have $1 million of ongoing funding. We will wait till the clock strikes midnight, as they say at the legislature, to see if that actually continues to be there. We can talk about that in a minute. But what we found in that task force was that if refrigerated trucks dead-ended here in the state of Utah, we would end up paying 10 to 30% more for our groceries, just simply because we didn't have something to fill those refrigerated trucks. We also found that if we wanted to be able to feed all of us here in Utah, we actually didn't have enough land to put it back into production to do that. So with that, a lot of people have seen our most recent work with Wasatch Community Gardens. And I think a lot of people have said, why a 2.5 acre urban farm? Why put a conservation easement on that in the center of Salt Lake? Well, actually, Utah Open Lands has a long history and relationship with Wasatch Community Gardens. I think a lot of people, when they think of Wasatch Community Gardens, they think about just garden plots. But really what they're doing is they're educating our next farmers. They're educating our consumers. They're educating all sorts of families about not just how to eat nutritionally from the food that we can grow, but how to actually grow food themselves. And so we were really, really happy to be able to partner in acquiring this 2.5 acres that, yes, probably would have been developed. It's in a great location. In fact, eventually there's going to be a U-pick opportunity on this particular property. That's Georgina Griffiths Yates, the director of Wasatch Community Gardens, and myself, when we were celebrating this amazing protection of this landscape, which is going to be a forever farm hub. And we really see a lot of synergy between our two organizations, because as these farmers and ranchers are getting older, some of the next generation who've watched how tough it is may not be interested in running the family farm. And in addition to that, we do need to be thinking about our agricultural pursuits slightly differently. One of the things that's great as we've worked with Wasatch Community Gardens that I think is important for people to understand is they have been able to grow 17 times the amount of food of most commercial farms on about 60% of the water. So if we can take some of their models and make them scalable to some of these other family farms, that's a win-win from our perspective. And again, we need to create a network within our communities that support our local farmers if we're going to retain some of that self-reliance. But believe it or not, this is not where Utah Open Lands began its journey with Wasatch Community Gardens in terms of understanding the importance of protecting these landscapes. Actually, one of our first conservation easements that was a fully donated conservation easement was down in the south end of the Salt Lake Valley with one of my favorite landowners. He has now passed away, but Gene Whedon. This is a picture of Gene. And I remember saying to Gene at the time that we protected his property back in 1998, we talked to him and I said, well, what are you going to say when they ask you about the development offers that could have paid you millions and millions of dollars? And his quick response was, you know, Wendy, you can't eat money. And I've thought about that as we think about our carbon footprint with respect to the foods that we eat, and also just really understanding how valuable these farms are in our local communities. In fact, Gene used to make this comment that I just absolutely loved, which was that he really felt that the best way to grow community and create community and really have resonance in your community was to give your neighbor a freshly picked tomato. And I think any one of us who've had a freshly picked tomato recognizes how valuable and how grateful we feel, and also how important we feel when somebody gives us one from their own garden. And so from that perspective, this is another part of what Gene's legacy was on the Whedon farm. This is one of the farmers from that is farming actually the Whedon property, and they are part of the International Rescue Committee. These are folks that oftentimes have come from different places throughout the world where they are actually seeking asylum here in the United States. They're refugees from some pretty horrific places. Well, how do they connect with the community even though they can't speak the language? Well, they're growing their equivalent of their freshly picked tomato of sometimes produce that they would grow in their own homelands on the Whedon property. And what we love about the fact that we were able to put this under a conservation easement is that the opportunity for these folks to connect to their community and to grow their food would not have been possible had it not been for the conservation easement that protected this landscape back in 1998. And I think that is a constant question that we get about protecting these landscapes and who is going to be that next generation of farmers and ranchers. And certainly we don't have all of the answers, but when I look at the fact that for several years after Gene passed away, this property was just kind of hanging out there. I could tell you the long story of having to defend the conservation easement against UDOT, which we succeeded. And I can tell the story of how for many, many years, we didn't know where this would end up. But today it is open to the public. There's this acreage that's being cultivated by the folks, the farmers with the International Rescue Committee. And then there's also a Wasatch Community Gardens activity, agriculture on this property as well. And so we know that that rich soil resource is always going to be valuable to us down the road. But once it's been converted to asphalt and concrete, you don't get to go back and grow those freshly picked tomatoes. So that really is something that has been at the heart of Utah Open Lands really since our inception. In fact, when we applied for the IRS, we knew that protecting these agricultural lands, really understanding that a lot of our large landscapes were in the hands of farming families, was going to be important. And so recently, I think a lot of people are very familiar with our protection of the Albert Kohler legacy farm. For those of you who are familiar with this, this cheese sign, this is the Heber Valley Artisan Cheese. The Kohler family produces the Heber Valley Artisan Cheese. They're right on the entry corridor to the Midway area. And I can honestly say, having met them, that their cows are some of the happiest cows I've met. They actually have a free access in and out of the barn. There's a robotic dairy barn so that they milk when they want to be milked. They all wear these Fitbits that actually allow the Kohlers to see how much they're eating, how much exercise they're getting, and whether or not their temperature has increased. So they can isolate a cow, give it the care that it needs, and make sure that it doesn't affect the rest of the herd. They even have automatic brushers and shiatsu massage mats that they lie on. They really do enjoy their lives. But I think one of the things that was really amazing, and it's when we look to the future of agriculture, and I think when we look to the future of preserving these large landscapes that have agricultural landowning families on them, what we looked at in protecting the Kohler property was really the fact that it would be an anchor tenant, if you will, for agriculture in the Heber Valley. The North Fields, which I'm going to talk about in a minute, all of those landscapes that really set the stage for this amazing place that people love to come and visit. And a lot of people live there and enjoy that quality of life. Really, if you don't have an anchor business like the Kohler Dairy, you have to think through, what is the agricultural economy going to be when you're protecting some of these landscapes? We now know that they have a thriving business. It's part of an agritourism and a niche market that a lot of family farms are looking to, but also any farmland that's protected, that's going to be areas to grow hay, and also for their cows to be able to graze. In fact, they don't till this land because this soil and the richness of these grasses are something that they've known actually for generations as being really, really vital. So they haven't tilled this land, which I might say adds to our carbon sequestration, right? It becomes a carbon sink in that area. Because the natural grasses, the soil that's there actually provide a lot of dense nutrients. And they tried it once, I guess, long ago, to till up a small portion of ground, and they found they couldn't grow the quality of forage that they can grow by just allowing the natural processes to take place. So that's a conservation easement that we're incredibly proud of, that the Leroy McAllister State Agricultural, the Land Open Space Fund was a part of, as well as the Midway Open Space Bond, Wasatch County, and then their federal partner, the natural NRCS, Natural Resource Conservation Service, and their agricultural land easement program. And, you know, I think that the Albert Kohler Dairy is really emblematic for me of really thinking through what that next farmer is going to be. Unfortunately, not too long after we protected this, Grant Kohler, who's in the center of this photo and is kind of was the head of the family, he passed away somewhat unexpectedly. But in the background, you can see his son, Russ, who actually went to school and became an engineer and was really excited about the robotic dairy when it came to the farm. He has taken over the reins, and they continue to educate over 700 school kids that come through their program. They work with Future Farmers of America, and they also work with the local 4-H. And so when you think about this, really part of what we need to be thinking about, and again, why we partnered with Wasatch Community Gardens, is who are those next land producers, food producers going to be, and are they going to be able to have the same kind of knowledge that we have today? So we're really pleased to see that, you know, this is an ongoing generational farm. And as Russ Kohler, the younger one, says, I just think Midway looks better with cows. So they're definitely there, but that has spurred us on as an organization to work on the North Fields. You can see several of the projects that Utah Open Lands has worked to protect. But in the gold and the yellow here are projects that we've either received funding for from the Leroy McAllister Fund or from NRCS. So we actually received almost $10 million in funding from these federal programs that we are going to apply to protecting lands within the Northfields. And again, when you think of the wetland resources that are throughout the Northfields, when you think of the visual values that so many people enjoy coming down on Highway 40 of the Northfields, this really is everything from carbon sequestration to giving us that iconic view. I love how the welcome to Heber Valley sign is really positioned so that your backdrop is looking over the entire Northfields. So we're looking forward to being able to move these projects forward. In fact, the Gertch property and the Mitchell Kissel property are two projects that we're asking for some funding from Wasatch County. We'll need to do a little bit more fundraising, but we've received substantial funding from the federal program to be able to enable this, so much so that just on one project alone, we are leveraging money that we would get from local sources in a 6-to-1 ratio. What we see is that's taking money that is out there and available for all sorts of different communities, and it's really helping our local farmers and ranchers and protecting this amazing resource and these open spaces.
Wendy, this might be a good time to jump in and get clarification on where Utah Open Lands does get the money. How do you fundraise? Who are your big donors? I don't understand where you get all your good money.
So we get money from folks like you, people who are our members to our organization. But then the federal program through the Farm Bill, they actually have put a significant amount of funding forward in what we call the Inflation Reduction Act. And all of those, they're looking to put money towards climate smart programs, where in protecting the land, you're also protecting a vital climate resource. And so the Northfields actually received some significant designation as well as funding, because in protecting these landscapes that have wetland values, again, these farmers and ranchers are not tilling the ground because the natural pasture land is perfect for it. Obviously, it has value for animals like sandhill crane. It's also within an area for many other species. They see that as meeting some of the climate smart objectives. And so that's a federal program that has given us funds. Those funds go directly to protecting these lands. They do not go to pay Utah Open Lands to work and to negotiate and pay for the appraisals and all of those sorts of things. Those we actually, we look to private foundations for that. And then obviously our members. We actually received a really wonderful, generous contribution from Kem Gardner at our fundraiser, Portraits of Preservation, that we held in the Heber Valley last year, that is helping us fund some of the negotiation that we're working on with these different landowners. The picture that I have here, or what I like to say, are some of the faces of the Northfields. They are landowners that really have been involved in the Heber Valley and in the Northfields in that area, kind of in a generational way. Chad Giles is at the top, Laren Gertch, and then Nora Lundeen is down at the bottom. And that brick house behind her is actually dates back to the mid 1800s. It's a really phenomenal structure to actually go out and see. But these are landowners who, I know we're not talking about how conservation easements come about, but these are landowners really that have chosen conservation. There is no way that conservation can compete, even with the dollars that we get from the federal programs. There is no way that they can compete with the development values. But these are landowners who choose to really leave a legacy for the next generation that is all about the land protection and ensuring that these landscapes are there for the next generation. Yes, to grow food, but also to enjoy and to gain that broader sense of place that we all appreciate when we look at these communities that we sincerely call home. I'll never forget when I started Utah Open Lands, and this will be my last comment before we open it up for questions. When I started Utah Open Lands, One of the folks that was really involved in a lot of the work that we were doing, a man that many of you probably know, Miles Rademan, he and I were chatting, and we'd worked together on some charrettes throughout the area about, community character. And he said, if we become any town USA, we're not going to have people leaving subdivision X, Y, and Z to come and recreate and spend their tourism dollars in any town USA. And I think that what we all appreciate about many of the communities on the Wasatch Back is that they really do have a sense of place, that that emboldens the community to be connected. And really, very much so, we are connected with one another in that connection to the land. That's really what I see so much of the work that we're doing right now as an organization. We're continuing to protect amazing places like Bonanza Flat with those recreational opportunities, but it is these heirloom landscapes, if you will, that I think we need to spend special attention to and understand how we can connect to even a larger sense of community. And when I say a larger sense of community, really the resources that are on these lands, everything from the soil and the soil health to the forests and the forest health, and the elk and the deer and these other creatures, these other parts of our community that really rely on these open landscapes, because without them, we're fragmenting habitat. We're losing these productive landscapes, obviously from a food perspective, which is the main focus of my discussion today, but also really just breaking up some of that continuity, which we're finding is even important when we start looking at habitat values and even wildfire values. The more that we can have those connections, the more that the natural processes hopefully can aid us in our survival as a human species. So I think that's all I have today. I'm happy to open it up to conversation and questions from you all.
Okay. Wendy, can you take that slide down?
I sure can.
Okay, we all should be able to just see each other now. Okay, who would like to ask the first question? Okay, Sherry.
Can you hear me now?
Yep.
Okay. I just want to tell you that this was wonderful. It was, I want you to speak to everybody, which I know you're doing. But it was important to talk to me too, because I'm running for an office here in Midway. And one of the most important things is conservation of this land here. It's so beautiful. And the people want to keep it that way. And I don't know much about that. So I'm happy that you have informed me about a lot of it. I'd like to talk to you even further about that, because I think it's so important. I live in heaven here, and my neighbors know it, and we all live in heaven, and we're all afraid of development. And I've heard stories, horror stories about, oh my God, the kids are going to sell the land. From neighbors, if anything happens to me, what do I do? And that was my first question. I have a neighbor who has a beautiful piece of land, and they have horses, and we all love their land. It's right. My area backs up to it, and in it, in the front. The one in back has been developed. Unfortunately, the kids sold it. But I just want to know how to address that to them when I speak to them, because I don't think they're aware of how to preserve it after they die, so that the kids won't sell it. Are there methods that I can inform them about?
Yeah, great question. And I just have to say thank you for being willing to serve in a capacity from a public perspective. I really think that the answer to so much of what we need to achieve to really sustain our communities does come down to good leadership. So I applaud anybody who's willing to throw their hat in the ring to be a part of that. And obviously the League of Women Voters, I have always been a big fan of the work that you guys have done to make sure that the communities are educated with the hundreds thousands of bills that end up getting passed at the legislature. Yeah, there are lots of ways that people can protect their land. The conservation easement is one of those tools that is the main tool that Utah Open Lands works. There are tax incentives for it, but there also are some potential funding alternatives as well. The tough part is really whether or not the land will qualify under one of these programs for conservation easements. And the best way to understand that is to just basically go out and take a look at the property and see where it falls. In addition to that,
Who does
Summit
that?
County and Wasatch County and Midway City and Park City have all passed open space bonds. I can tell you firsthand that in order to leverage some of these federal dollars and actually get them here to the state of Utah, it requires that we have local matches. In fact, one of the things that's significant about the Lee Ray McAllister Fund potentially getting ongoing funding, even though it's only $1 million, is that it actually opens up the door for us to be able to attract more of those federal program dollars. And they're significant. I mean, we're talking about just from the Farm Bill, the state of Utah could be eligible for $20 million, for example, to go after something like the North Fields in the Wasatch County area. So it's significant, and I've seen time and time again that when communities don't have some of these local dollars, it is really hard to make the match and to leverage those, because it's just there isn't enough of the private funds out there. And as you all know, there are a lot of really great causes out there, from healthcare and family issues all the way to land conservation. And so you're competing with a much broader scale when you're looking at some of those private foundations. So, I know Midway has talked a little bit about, do they do another open space bond? Because they were able to leverage so many of their dollars in the first open space bond. Things like the Kohler Dairy, we matched the Midway contribution from the open space bond in a ratio of 10-1.
Wow. That brings me on. Can I ask another question real quick?
Sure, go ahead.
It brings me to my concern about what's going on with the new highway and getting into those North Fields. As that, if that's all conserved, how can they build a highway through that? I don't understand.
That is one of my favorite political conversations of the day.
Right.
So a couple of things that I would like to highlight. First of all, Utah Open Lands doesn't conserve property to stop roads. That's not what we're doing. Many of you may or may not be aware of the bypass discussion. I'm guessing you are. There actually is a right-of-way back in 2009, some of which has been purchased by Wasatch County for the bypass road. I could really bore you with the details on what I've learned from UDOT with respect to that. But the reality of it is that bypass can actually be built, and it doesn't have to go through the heart of the North Fields. It doesn't actually have to touch these properties. And I would say that definitely Utah Open Lands is firmly for open space, but we're not against development.
Right.
What we see is making good choices. And when I look at the ability to leverage the federal dollars, to leverage the Wasatch County dollars in a 6-to-1 ratio on some of these things, and to realize that actually you could put the bypass on land that is already destined to be converted. That soil is going to be converted to concrete and asphalt, because there are other landscapes that you could put those roads through that actually are slated to be developed. The landowners have a choice. And I think that when you have a landowner who's choosing to exercise their private property right to develop their land, that might be the consideration for the road, as opposed to a landowner who's exercising their private property right to conserve their land. That maybe should be the focus that we have of seeing that right for that landowner and protecting those landscapes. So I think that there are options. And again, even if the land is conserved, one of the things that's important for people to understand is that conservation easements are not safe from condemnation. Now, yes, Utah Open Lands has put conservation easements on property, and then UDOT has said, actually, we'd like to go there. And we've defended those properties. High Ute Ranch, is an example where UDOT came out with a couple of different alternatives. And quite frankly, there were 900 people, 900 of you all probably, who called up and UDOT said, no, I don't think we want to go through this amazing piece of open space. I think that open space is always going to be a target for poor planning. So my suggestion is don't poorly plan things. We know that if a landscape is conserved, it is not going to generate traffic. Cows are not getting in their cars and driving down to Walmart. Okay. We also know that the cows are not going to school. We know that open space is actually a net revenue. So I come back to, this is about good planning. This is about good leadership. This is about choices. We can have landowners who choose to develop their property. We can have landowners who choose to preserve their property, but we should treat them equally. And we should support those who are conserving the land just as much as we have all of these systems in place to support those that are being developed. Because let's face it, right? You have a new school that gets built when a new subdivision comes in and you have that increased growth. That's not a bad thing, but let's recognize that those values do have an equal value to the community. We all understand we need growth, but we need to balance it with the things that also make our communities unique and the things that really generate, some revenue for our communities, especially when you look at people who want to come and recreate in some of these areas. They're not going to do it if it looks like, again, the subdivision that they just left.
Yeah. Okay, let's have another question. Anyone? Helen.
Wendy, terrific presentation, and having just driven up to Timber Lakes States from Salt Lake, I was astounded first at, these pristine areas. Now that I look at the map, I can see that they were part of the North Fields, and then you'd have just incredible development going on next door. So your description of the balance and the need to kind of accommodate both make it a little more understandable. My question is, where else besides Wasatch County is Utah Open Lands currently working, either with farming ranchers and or kind of supporting municipalities who want to do some open space ponds?
Great question. So we are a statewide organization. We actually right now are working on a project in Moab. I can't always talk about the projects that we're working on,
Sure.
but the project in Moab actually would increase some recreational opportunity. Bonanza Flat is another hot topic for folks. And really, what it has shown us through COVID, where we saw a 300% increase in the use of our open spaces, is that we don't have enough recreational opportunities either. And so we need to be able to create more of these recreational opportunities and expand this ability to do that. So we've talked with some of the city folk in Moab. I don't know that they're moving forward with an open space bond, but we certainly have provided them with information with respect to that. We've protected a lot of land in the Castle Valley and along the Colorado River. We have several different properties along the Colorado River that we've worked to protect. We're also working with the communities down in Utah County. Having been there, I'm astounded every time I go. I don't know that I would ever move to Utah County at this point, which makes me sad because it's an amazing place. But I think a lot of folks are familiar with the fact that we worked with the Redford family in Utah County on their lands in Sundance. And I think some of that has spurred work that we've done down there working with Utah County. Interestingly, many of you may or may not know that Bridal Veil Falls was almost developed and sold to a private landowner. And we worked with the county to put a conservation easement on that. After that, we worked with Kevin Stratton, Representative Stratton, and that is now a state monument. So we're working with a lot of different communities throughout Utah, including one of the other federal programs that is available that is providing open space and even recreational opportunities is a program called ACUB, the Army Compatible Use Buffer Area funding that is around Camp Williams. Camp Williams is a national base, really, where there's a lot of training that has been done there. A lot of the conflicts in the Middle East, folks were brought into Camp Williams because in our hot Utah summers on the west side of Salt Lake, it mimics some of the environments that they're going to be in. And obviously with Apache helicopters and all of those other things, they want to have a buffer around the base. And I think we've been working with Camp Williams now for several years on protecting landscapes as a buffer that also provides some community amenities, like some of these recreational opportunities. We also are finalizing a project in Bear Lake. In fact, I have a meeting with some Bear Lake homeowners tonight, but it's about 550 acres that are on the shores, the eastern shores of Bear Lake. And when you consider the endemic fish species and even some endemic bird species that are right there in the Bear Lake area near the National Wildlife Refuge, this property adjacent to Cisco Beach State Park will just forever be protected and will always be open space, both from a visual and from a habitat perspective. So I could go on. There are more properties, but yes, we're working in a lot of different places.
Thank you.
Another question? Anyone? Wendy, when you said in Salt Lake Community Gardens, it was a hub, right? Is that what you called it? A farm hub? What
Yep.
did you mean by that?
Well, so the thing that's really been wonderful as we've worked on this project with Wasatch Community Gardens, which the press conference that we did and the 3 seconds or 3 minutes it got of airtime was the result of about 3 to 5 years of work between Utah Open Lands and Wasatch Community Gardens, really building this concept that basically many of you are familiar with their 4th Street Garden. That was the first open space we did, and they do have kind of a core center. I don't know where that is, the Grateful Tomato Garden area, if you've been down there. But what this will serve as is their Green Phoenix Farm, which actually was on leased land that is RDA land that is now being converted. All of the work that they did there, the training, the microgreen work that they've done that's now become scalable, the regenerative agriculture, really restoring, and the additive process of really bringing that soil back to life, which actually they are going to actually move that soil to this new site. They're going to have that will be their forever home now. And I think that was one of the things that we really focused on, is they have all of these really, really great programs, but what jeopardized the work that they're doing with the homeless, the women homeless sector of the population, the work that they're doing to provide additional access for the youth. A lot of kids on the west side of Salt Lake that might not have the opportunity to understand some of this relationship that we have with our food. And all of the training programs that they're doing really for young farmers, that was all in jeopardy because the land underneath them was really being like the rug being pulled out from underneath them. So that's what this new forever, that's why we call it the Forever Farm Hub, because all of that activity, all of that good education is now going to be rooted in a place that can never be taken away. And that was really for us, when we look at what we need to do in terms of education, we hope to be able to do this on other landscapes. We're looking at how we can have sort of place-based education that people can then learn how to be better stewards of the land. Everything from understanding that connection with food to also understanding, when we go out and we recreate in these places where they're calving or fawning, the elk and the moose and the deer, and we do it in May, we actually are endangering those young calves because they might get abandoned by their elk mother. What are the kind of stewards that we want to do? How important is it to have woodpeckers and flammulated owls that are eating those bark beetles that are causing some of these wildfires? And are we protecting those habitats? And are we being sensitive even when we go out and recreate to, as we say, leave it loved? I think we need to go beyond leave no trace, because picking up doggy poop bags, I can tell you that's not working. So we need to leave it loved. And that's what we're really looking at as an organization is that's part of it. Our land conservation needs good stewardship, and we're all a part of that.
Okay. Anyone else? A question?
I do have another question. I don't know if this is a platform for it, but I was wondering, has Midway been working with you?
Yes. Yes, I have to say that
Because I'm just running now, but I want to know if they've been good stewards.
yeah, I mean, I think that the majority of the elected officials on the Wasatch Back, they do understand this, but we're entering what I would say a crossroads moment.
Yes, we are. Yeah.
And I think that, you know, I get it. I actually wrote legislation in 1994 to use a percent of real estate monies to create a fund for affordable housing and open space. It went over like a lead balloon. Okay, I'm just gonna be honest with you, but I get it. We all have these choices and we all have these decisions. And I think that one of the reasons I've become so committed and I've dedicated my time as my career to these conservation easements and these open spaces is that sometimes when we get it to these places of a crossroad, we can make rash decisions. And those are often fueled by, you know, the political winds at the time. And the conservation easement and the defense of these conservation easements, they kind of keep us from making some of those rash decisions. And that's very much where I see us right now. When I see what is facing Wasatch County as the fastest growing county in the nation, when I see what is facing Summit County and really the state of Utah, because we're on the map, people love what's here. The Great Salt Lake, right? We are on a razor edge as to whether or not we are going to make the right choices. We're going to make the right decisions. We're going to educate that next generation to ensure that we've protected what needs to be protected for our own longevity. And I'm talking about economic longevity, right? We can develop something today and that's it. We don't get to come back and say, maybe we shouldn't have done that. And so that's why I think some of these decisions and some of where our elected leaders are at, I really do think it is a crossroads. And I think it's important. We haven't done enough. And those places that we have protected, we really need to think about whether we should put them in harm's way, whether we should jeopardize them, because those are the decisions that are going to make the difference for the next generation. And we're making those decisions for that generation today.
For sure.
Sorry, that was my soapbox. See what you did?
No, I appreciate it. Because I agree.
Wendy, I have a clarification. You mentioned the NRCS. National, what is that?
That's the Natural Resource Conservation Service. It's part of the
Oh,
U.S.
nice.
Department of Agriculture.
Okay.
And they have a number of different programs that they do. One of them is their agricultural conservation easement program. They also have a wetland reserve program. They do EQIP. I don't remember what that acronym is for, but basically farmers can get grants and loans to do water optimization, you know, all of those sorts of things. So it's a national program, but whether or not we as a state get a share of those federal dollars, which we're all taxpayers, right?
Yeah.
Whether or not we get a fair share of those federal dollars really comes down to whether or not you have local programs. And that's why this $1 million in ongoing continuous funding for the Lee Ray McAllister starts to put us on the same playing field, not at the same level at all of states like Michigan and Pennsylvania and Colorado and others that have always had these ongoing fundings, right? Like the state of Colorado has $55 million, give or take, every year for outdoor open space agricultural preservation. This is the first year that Utah is getting ongoing funding and it's $1 million. I mean, it's great. I want to celebrate that.
Yeah.
We are grateful.
Have to
We'll
be
see what we can do with that.
All right. Thank you.
Where is Camp Williams you mentioned? And where is Camp Williams?
So Camp Williams kind of sits at the base of the Ochre Mountains. So if you look at the Salt Lake Valley, you know, you have the Wasatch Range to the east, and to the west are I think most people are familiar with Kennecott, right? The mining operation. And just to the south of Kennecott is Camp Williams. And I think it's been a base there. It's about 20,000 acres in and of itself. And I think it's been a base there. Gosh, I want to say since the early
It's a
1900s.
it's a military base.
Yeah, it is.
Wow.
Yep.
I never knew about that. Okay. Any other questions?
I have a question.
Zita?
Wendy, you mentioned that no land is safe from from being condemned.
Yeah.
So the Olympics are probably coming, and there was some takeover of some properties before.
Yeah.
I'm Jay Bell's wife.
Yes, I know you. I know you. How are
Yes.
you? Good to see you.
Good to see you, Wendy. So I'm again concerned.
Yes. Yeah, I think it's a great concern, and I think you bring up a really good point. And it's a little known fact, but some of the land that was purchased with open space monies in the Kimball Junction area back in, I don't know, 2008 or something like that, some of that was transferred to the Olympic Sports Park, and it's where you see some of the athlete housing. And that is a tough conversation. What I would say is that Utah Open Lands has fought condemnation on at least 4 properties, and we have succeeded every single time. And one of them was the base station for the gondola going up Little Cottonwood Canyon. And we fought that. I'm not saying that I'm for or against the gondola. That's not what Utah Open Lands stands for. But I am absolutely for the sanctity of the landscapes that we've protected and that we put under a conservation easement. And to put a really fine point on it, Zita, and I know you'll be able to appreciate this, I just don't think that's a good look for the Olympics. I mean, I hate to say it, but if that's what you're going to do, is you're going to come and condemn land that has been protected for the wildlife. You're going to condemn a place that is that is refuge for these species.
Yeah.
I just don't. Then what are we doing? What is the face that we're showing the world? Is this our new scandal? I mean, maybe I'm being too political, but I just don't think that is the appropriate thing to do. We can have all of this, and we can have it in balance. And again, I think it's fundamentally about good planning. Absolutely, if there is an essential need from an eminent domain perspective, but is the public use that we're going to condemn the property for greater than the public use that it is already being used for? And I think that is the question that fundamentally needs to be asked. And I think if you ask those right questions, you get to the right answer. So it can't be about political expediency. It can't be about perceived values. It has to come down to that fundamental element, because in order for us to sustain these communities, I think we absolutely have to make sure that we have stayed true to the guarantees we've made in protecting some of these properties. So I just don't think, from my perspective, we are bound to defend these conservation easements, and that is what we will do.
Wendy, thank you so much.
You